In the late 18th century, the Qing dynasty in China presided over a vast and prosperous empire, viewing itself as the celestial center of the world. This ancient civilization was largely self-sufficient, possessing a rich culture and a highly developed economy. Meanwhile, the British Empire, fueled by the Industrial Revolution, was expanding its global reach and commercial interests. A significant trade imbalance existed between the two nations. British consumers had developed an insatiable appetite for Chinese goods, especially tea, silk, and porcelain. However, the Chinese had little interest in the manufactured goods Britain had to offer. Trade was strictly controlled through the Canton system, which limited all foreign commerce to the single port of Canton, modern-day Guangzhou. Foreign merchants were confined to a small district of warehouses known as the 13 Factories. As a result, Britain had to pay for its vast tea imports almost exclusively with silver. This created a massive drain of silver from the British economy, alarming politicians and merchants alike. In search of a commodity to reverse this flow, the British East India Company found a sinister solution: opium. The company began to cultivate opium poppies on a massive scale in its Indian territories. This opium was then smuggled into China by private traders and corrupt officials. Illegal trade grew exponentially, and the flow of silver began to reverse. Now, silver was hemorrhaging from China to pay for the illicit drug. The social consequences in China were devastating. Opium addiction spread like a plague, crippling communities and families. It afflicted every level of society, from poor laborers to court officials and soldiers. The widespread addiction led to social decay, economic disruption, and a decline in public morality. Daoguang Emperor became increasingly alarmed by the crisis. He was concerned not only for his people's well-being, but also for the economic and military weakening of his empire. In 1838, he appointed a highly respected and incorruptible official, Lin Sexu, as imperial commissioner. Lin Sexu was granted extraordinary powers to travel to Canton and eliminate the opium trade by any means necessary. Upon his arrival in Canton in March 1839, Lin Sexu moved with speed and determination. He issued a public proclamation condemning the evils of opium. He arrested over 1,700 Chinese opium dealers. He demanded that foreign merchants surrender their entire stock of opium. The foreign traders, led by the British Superintendent of Trade, Charles Elliot, initially refused. In response, Lin Sexu blockaded the foreign factories, effectively holding the merchants hostage. All Chinese servants were withdrawn, and supplies of food and water were cut off. Under immense pressure, Charles Elliot relented. He agreed to hand over more than 20,000 chests of opium, valued at millions of silver dollars. Lin Sexu was not content with merely confiscating the drug. He wanted to make a powerful statement to the world. On June 3, 1839, he began the systematic destruction of the surrendered opium at Human Beach. The chests were broken open, and the opium was mixed with salt and lime in large trenches. The resulting slurry was then washed out into the South China Sea. The process took 23 days and was witnessed by locals and some foreign observers. News of the destruction and the confinement of British merchants reached London, causing outrage. The pro-opium lobby, with significant influence in Parliament, framed the issue as an attack on free trade and an insult to British national honor. They conveniently ignored the illicit nature of the opium trade. After a narrow vote, the British government decided to dispatch a military expedition to China. In June 1840, the British Expeditionary Force arrived off the coast of China. This marked the beginning of the First Opium War. The conflict revealed a stark technological gap between the two nations. The British possessed modern rifles, artillery, and steam-powered gunboats. The Qing forces were equipped with outdated matchlock guns, cannons, and traditional war junks. The British strategy was to control key coastal cities and blockade major rivers. They easily captured the island of Chusan as a base of operations. War was a series of one-sided victories for the British. The Qing government, accustomed to fighting land-based wars in Central Asia, was unprepared for a naval conflict. In 1842, a British fleet sailed up the Yangtze River, threatening the vital city of Nanking. With their Grand Canal supply route cut and the former capital at risk, the Qing government was forced to sue for peace. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Nanking on August 29, 1842. It was the first of what became known as the unequal treaties. China was forced to pay a large indemnity to Britain. 5 treaty ports, including Canton and Shanghai, were open to foreign trade and residence. The island of Hong Kong was ceded to the British Empire in perpetuity. The Canton system was abolished, ending the old restrictions on trade. Crucially, the treaty did not mention the opium trade, which continued to flourish. The outcome of the war was a profound shock to the Chinese psyche. It shattered the illusion of the Qing dynasty's invincibility and the notion of China as the world's center. The years following the treaty were not peaceful. Foreigners, protected by extraterritoriality, often acted with impunity. The British were dissatisfied, believing the treaty had not granted them enough access to the vast Chinese market. They sought a revision of the treaty to open all of China to trade and to legalize opium. A pretext for renewed hostilities arose in October 1856. Chinese officials boarded the Arrow, a ship registered in Hong Kong, searching for pirates. They arrested several of the Chinese crew members and allegedly lowered the British flag. The British consul in Canton, Harry Parkes, used this Arrow incident to provoke a crisis. This event became the spark for the Second Opium War, also known as the Arrow War. This time, Britain was joined by France, which used the execution of a French missionary as its own pretext. In late 1857, an Anglo-French force attacked and occupied Canton. The Allied forces then sailed north to threaten the capital, Beijing. They captured the Taku forts, which guarded the approach to Tianjin. Faced with this imminent threat, the Qing government signed the treaties of Tianjin in June 1858. These treaties opened more ports, allowed foreign legations in Beijing, and permitted Christian missionary activity in the interior. However, the emperor's court in Beijing resisted the ratification of the treaties. When British and French diplomats tried to travel to Beijing to exchange the ratifications, they were repulsed at the Taku forts. Infuriated by this resistance, the Anglo-French forces launched a larger invasion in 1860. It decisively defeated the Qing army and marched on the capital. As the Allied army approached Beijing, the Xianfeng emperor fled the city. In an act of punitive retribution, the British High Commissioner to China, Lord Elgin, ordered the destruction of the imperial summer palaces. The old summer palace and the summer palace were vast, magnificent complexes of gardens, lakes and pavilions filled with priceless art. For several days, British and French troops looted the palaces, citing countless treasures. Then they set the entire complex ablaze. The palaces burned for days, a cultural catastrophe intended to humiliate the emperor and the Qing dynasty. With the capital occupied and the palaces in ruins, the Qing government had no choice but to surrender completely. In October 1860, They signed the Convention of Peking. This convention ratified the treaties of Tianjin, imposed further indemnities, and ceded the Kowloon Peninsula to Britain. Most significantly, the opium trade was finally and officially legalized. The Opium Wars were a watershed moment in Chinese history. They marked the beginning of what is known in China as the Century of Humiliation. The wars exposed the Qing dynasty's weakness and inability to protect China from foreign aggression. They led to a series of unequal treaties that carved up spheres of influence and crippled Chinese sovereignty. The legacy of the Opium Wars fueled decades of anti-foreign sentiment and nationalist movements in China. For Britain, the wars secured its commercial interests and established a new era of gunboat diplomacy. The conflict remains a deeply sensitive and controversial chapter in the history of East-West relations. The destruction of the summer palaces is remembered as an act of cultural barbarism. The story of the Opium Wars is a stark reminder of how global trade, when driven by greed and inequality, can lead to devastating conflict.